Good afternoon. We're going to start in just a second here. Hi, my name is Brian Hirsch, and today's program promises to be the best Agile Government Livestream we've ever done because it's our first one. So happy people are tuned in for this. Really excited to see people from a number of different states and cities signed up to join the conversation today. Please go ahead, and if you want, introduce yourself in the chat so that people know who else is here listening and chime in with questions. Disclaimer: we've never done this before, so beg your forgiveness if we hit some bumps along the way as we figure this out. And also, I'm fighting a little cold, so I'm sorry if my throat sounds scratchy. I also want to give a quick shout out before we get started. I was so surprised and delightfully surprised to see two different U.S. senators, staffers, signed up for today's live stream. So wanted to give a shout out to Senator Cassidy from Louisiana and Senator Wyden from Oregon. Being married to a state senator, I have a special appreciation for how difficult it is to pass laws that depend on good technology implementation. And so I'm just so happy that these offices are paying attention to this conversation. And I also, I like to say to people that good implementation is bipartisan or is nonpartisan. So more good evidence to that point. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself and then bring on our guest. My name, again, is Brian Hirsch. I run a program called Agile Gov. It's an accelerator for government employees working to improve digital public services. And one organization in my program, the department is buying Agile product development services for the first time. So the request for proposals that we're putting together uses template language from the United States Digital Service website. And as we're working through the details, I've been thinking about questions that I'd love to ask the person from USDS who made the template and thought up this approach to a firm fixed price Agile contract. And so it's structured differently from the time and materials approach that we took on all of the procurements I oversaw when I was Chief Digital Officer for the state of Massachusetts. I generally understand the approach. I think I know how to help people make it work, but I also don't know what I don't know. And I'd love to know from the person who wrote it, where it came from and how she arrived at the approach, what suggestions she might have for me. I happen to know her. Her name is Tracy Walker. In 2011, when she worked for the White House, she designed a procurement vehicle for Agile software development services. And it was one of the first procurements in the United States to take this approach. I was hired through that procurement, and I worked under that contract as the tech lead for the Obama White House's web development team for 3 years. And so I'm delighted to have this excuse to reach out to Tracy for a conversation. But it occurred to me, a lot of people in government have had or will have questions like mine, but wouldn't know who to talk to about this stuff. And so rather than keep this conversation to myself one-on-one, I asked Tracy if she'd be willing to try this experiment with me and do this as a YouTube live stream so that folks can tune in with questions and our conversation can live on as a recording for anyone who might be interested in the future. So with that, let's bring Tracy on, if I can figure out how to do it. Here she is. Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
Welcome.
I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you start by talking a bit about yourself?
So, as mentioned, I'm Tracy Walker. I am now currently the Executive Director of the Digital Services Coalition, which is a nonprofit trade association which helps small to mid-sized companies navigate government. They specialize in Agile software development, human-centered design, and a lot of the services that we're talking about today to enable government digital transformations at state, local, and federal levels. So prior to that, where I really got started with this was in my career as a federal contracting officer. I started in the General Services Administration, um, a GSA back in the day when it was called the Federal Technology Service, and then worked through working on waterfall projects up until the point when I got to move to the White House in 2008 and work under the Obama administration when they came in. So a fun little claim to fame that I have is I got to buy the first presidential handheld device ever in any administration. So I got to get BlackBerry One as one of my contracts, which was really exciting. And they came in with a very new approach to technology and new approach to the tools and things that they wanted to have in the administration. And at the time, since I was working and specializing in IT contracts, I was paired up with them to try to figure out how to navigate all of that. So whitehouse.gov was one of the contracts we worked on, as well as several others over the administration. Following healthcare.gov, when it was launched and the program became a success. However, the launch of the site, as we all historically know, around 10 years ago, kind of crashed due to problems with load balancing and everybody wanting to jump on and sign up at the same time, which in a lot of tech industries is not a big deal. But for this program, it was kind of like, oh no, tech failed us. So how do we fix it? So at the time, they brought in people from the industry, Silicon Valley and other places, to say, how can you support fixing this problem that we have? And because of that, Mikey Dickerson and other people came in from industry to help fix that. And as a result, they said that worked out so well. Why don't we create a little core of people from industry to come in, work in government for a while, take a little time out, break from their job, so to speak, and come do a little bit of the civic tech work. And that program was created called the U.S. Digital Service. And so it lived under the Office of Management and Budget at the White House. And they also recognized that at the time of healthcare.gov, it wasn't a problem of just the technology failing or having a problem, but also how the contract was structured. So because of my work that had already been happening with whitehouse.gov, I came in and helped create the digital service procurement team there. We called ourselves the Procurementati, and basically started trying to scale what we learned already on contracts at the White House to the greater government population, and saying these are ways that we can do this. We paired up with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, the federal CIO in OMB, and said these are ways that we think procurements can be better. And so a lot of it was based on the stuff we learned from trial and error back in the day when you and I worked together on those initial contracts.
Great. There's so much that I want to hear about that you just mentioned. Can I take us back to the trial and error? And actually, maybe we could even start before then. Can you just set the stage for us? Bring us back to what was going on leading up to this first procurement in 2011. Just set the context in that time. What was going on around you?
Sure. So when a new administration comes in, there's a transition period. And at the time in the Executive Office of the President, when you have to set up a new contract, you set it up based on what is traditionally working, and you don't know which transition team is going to come in because you're still waiting on the results of the election. But at the same time, you have to have something in place to facilitate a total transfer of the website, whitehouse.gov, by the day, noon on the day that the president takes office. So we had to have something in place for a transition team to come in, and we set up a contract on a cost plus award fee basis at the time, which was giving basically the opportunity for us to work with the new media team when they came in to set the stage for whitehouse.gov. And so it did go successfully. We, on the day that President Obama took office, the switch was flipped and the website came up. Well, following that work, and we were administrating that, and everything was going along fine. But in 2011, there was an initiative to make petitions website. So this was launched, and it was called We the People at the time, and it was based on the premise that the freedom of speech and the right to petition the government was something that President Obama had promised in a State of the Union address, and said, we will make this happen. And so we had to figure out how to facilitate it through whitehouse.gov. And everything was going very well. We were ready to launch. And the day that it launched, everybody was super excited about it, flooded it with petitions, and crashed the site. And so, again, a little bit of a load balance testing problem, a look at the fact that they were just not anticipating how many people were going to come out and try to sign the petitions. So that caused a very big deal, because at the back end side of things, we were the ones who had to respond to figure out what was wrong with this. How do we support it? How do we get it back up? How do we ensure that it's going to be successful, not just today, but the next day? And as people want to use this and are very interested in it, it's going to bring a lot more visitors to the website than we had anticipated. So something that maybe commercial companies have experience with when they launch something new, or they're, anticipating this, but it wasn't necessarily something government had a lot of experience with either, with, starting something on day one and millions of people coming in. So that's where we looked at and said, all right, we have a challenge. And we look back at our processes to say, well, why did we not anticipate the fact that we could handle over millions of people coming into the website at the time? And we had to, bring in kind of firefighting and figure out how to make it work and get it back up to speed so it was more stable, reliable, and ready to take on more petitions as that went through. So a little bit of behind the scenes baseball on that, of what happened on that day. So good, yeah.
Okay, so the petitions website launches. The
Mm-hmm.
promise of petitions is, anyone can create a petition, and if you get a certain number of signatures, you'll get a response, right?
Mhm.
And
I think it was like 10,000, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So launch day comes and it crashes.
Mhm.
It seems like there are a lot of ways to react to a problem like that. One reaction one might anticipate from the procurement officer is like, well, who messed up, right? But it seems like that wasn't your reaction. Like you saw a structural problem in the contract to be addressed somehow. What about this set of circumstances believe there's something in the structure of the contract that is creating a problem here?
So the challenge that happened when this problem, arose, was that we were looking at, again, as I mentioned before, a cost type contract, which, when you think about what that is, you don't know that there's going to be an outcome. You're paying for a best effort of services to happen. But in reality, we all knew that the system had to work. We knew we were trying to buy something that was a functional system and to be ready to do it and all of those things. So when it came through to say, like, well, how do we fix this? We still had to continue to pay the costs of the company to fix it. Or the other option, just in general contracting, is a termination for cause, but that was completely off the table because we had to make this work. So it challenged the administration to say, well, this isn't the way contracts should be. Why should we be paying taxpayers' dollars for something that wasn't necessarily, in our hands, because we paid somebody else to do it? And so we stepped back and we started looking at this and saying, all right, well, what are the other options out there to do it? And at the time, we had a product owner whose name is Lee Heyman. We both know him. And he was learning about this agile development stuff and trying to pitch it to the teams to say, this is a better way of doing development. We should be doing it this way. And he came to me and said, I have an idea for a contract, but you can't do it. And I am always one that's going to take on, something that's interesting and exciting and put my problem solving hat on. And I was like, okay, well, what is it? And he's like, well, I can't tell you what I want. I can't tell you when I want it. I can't tell you how much it's going to be, but I know I only want to pay for results, delivered results. You can't do that. And I was like, challenge accepted. So that really kind of kicked off the idea of learning about agile development. At the time, we brought in Kanban as a process and started looking at that. All the people on the program team got the Kanban book. We all started reading through it. And then I started looking at what was being applied in industry, in the commercial industry, for agile software development. Now, at the time in 2011, 2012, agile software development was not a new concept. It had already been out 11 or 12 years. So, it was launched in 2001. This was something that industry knew, and they had a lot of experience with it. So I started looking at what they were doing and researching, where does that meet up to what is a government rule or a regulation or something that says we can't do something that way? And realized that, as every procurement person in the federal government knows, that if the federal acquisition regulations don't say you can't, then you can. And it just, we looked at the flexibilities that were available to us at the time to figure out how do we look at this contract, how do we baseline something new, and try to figure out things from there.
And so what did you figure out? How did you structure this first procurement?
So we still had underneath the first contracts, as we were still working underneath this, it was still that cost plus basis. But then we started baselining and brought a team together and started doing work in progress limits and establishing them, trying to figure out how much, what user stories were. And that user stories was another term for requirement. That there was a predictable outcome that was if everything went through the process the right way, you were going to have the delivery of something tangible at the end of it. And what that tangible piece was either a function of updating the system, a bug fix, some new, design concept or something along those lines that was an actual repeated thing that you could expect from something going in the process as a user story or a requirement and coming out with the team that was working. And again, it's a team-based model. So there was a development team brought together. They worked on it for about 2 weeks. And then at the end of that, there was something tangible we put in. So we started looking at those metrics and baselining that and saying, well, how can we turn this into something that is a deliverable from a fixed price reality? And that's one of the things with firm fixed price contracts is that you have to have something tangible delivered to you. Like if I need a chair, I'm going to go buy a chair and now I have a chair to sit on. A lot of times in industry, we think, okay, well, I've got to buy that chair. So I don't have to put the specs out or anything. I just go buy the chair. Here's the money. I don't need to know the process of building the chair. In this situation, we had to kind of deconstruct the process of building the chair and say, I know we ultimately need a chair, but I'm going to buy it a leg at a time. I'm going to buy the seat. I'm going to buy the back. And we're going to construct it together once we get these pieces, because unlike a chair, software systems are very complex and it's more of a science than a hard, fast rule of everything fits into the same model. So we were like, all right, let's figure out how to break this down and buy the pieces of the chair in a different way. And yet I can still pay for the fact that I got a leg. So we designed a leg, we built a leg, I've got a leg. So I have one piece of a chair, which was a different model than traditional waterfall methods, which really kind of looked and said, we have a very big program. We're going to put a lot of requirements together. The system has to do all of these functional things, and then we're going to pay you an amount for that. And that was more of the traditional way. Well, with Agile development, we were looking at breaking those things down into much smaller chunks, more bite-sized pieces of iterative development, and saying at the end of each of these things, we've got something tangible. So therefore, we can say, yes, we can firm fixed price that tangible result, as opposed to leaving up to chance that we might have something at the end of that. So that's really where this theory and the methodology kind of came from. But a couple other things had to happen in the contract world in order to enable this thought that we were doing. And one of those was looking at the idea of technology as being something that was always going to be needing to be updated. So prior to this, a lot of times systems were built, they were turned over in a steady state to develop another set of developers who just did bug fixes or just a little maintenance, and yep, system's running, good to go. But in reality, as we're coming to understand now, every time you need something new, you need to have it as an update. Well, previously, when you wrote a contract and those requirements were hard coded into contracts to do new development or to change what you had originally planned as requirements, those required modifications. And modifications to the contracts puts a delay in the development. They can be additionally costly. And it depends on the shop, but those delays can range a long time if it's not something that's the priority of the company or the contracting officer to be able to do it. And so we wanted to find a way that was going to allow the process of agility to flow through the contract as much as it was going to flow through the actual process itself. So we stepped back and we said, let's not hard code the technical requirements into the contract. Let's hard code the fact that we're going to buy a process and that we know that there's going to be an undefined amount of technical requirements that do have to pass through this, but we don't have to be involved at the contract level every time a program person changes their mind about what the system actually needs, as long as the overall system is still meeting the full objective of what we originally were going after. So that was a big kind of shift in the fundamental thinking of what had to be in the contract itself versus how can we enable an agile process through an agile contract.
Okay. So I wonder if we can just deconstruct a few of the nuts and bolts pieces to make it like
Sure.
practical, tactical, waterfall compared to this new
Hmm.
invention that you came up with for procuring agile development services. So when it comes to setting requirements in waterfall versus in the agile approach, can you
Hmm.
just contrast the just requirement setting? What's the difference?
Sure. Another big enabler on that was that we pretty much are always looking at both the fact that we're buying commercial services and we should be buying them on performance-based contracting, which means performance-based contracting is really looking as an objective and outcome as opposed to a hard-coded process that is written and defined in like a statement of work. So government is stepping back from this and saying, I don't I want to buy a system that enables the ability for um, veterans to get, real-time access to their benefits claims. That's an outcome that they can get versus a waterfall process that might say, build me a system that does X on this date, does X on this date, does X on this date, and really kind of putting those things in there. So it's stepping back from that and saying, have you met the objectives for what we're trying to do, and can you facilitate that? It's also looking at industry to come in and propose their solutions and their teams based on their technical knowledge and their understanding of what skill sets are needed in order to reach those objectives and outcomes, rather than government feeling like they had to be the ones that had to define and describe everything, which was still kind of a method under the traditional waterfall. Project management was done in plans, and hopefully the execution of plans in under a little bit more of the waterfall method, whereas under agile development, you're not planning things, you're actually just going out and doing them and learning on the fly. And in the event that something doesn't work, it took 2 weeks to put it in, it can take another 2 weeks to pull something back out. So the pace is faster and the risk is reduced to those smaller time boxes. So while failure can still happen on both projects, you start to see it at the beginning of the project on an agile software development if you make wrong technical decisions or you find that you have information you didn't know at the beginning, which usually happens. Again, most of these contracts are being set up to support technology and missions that are going to be going on for years, more likely beyond the extent of any one particular contract. So how do you facilitate and enable those?
Okay. And the way that you described Lee's challenge that you stepped up to, I don't know exactly what I'm going to need. It sounds like that there still has to be a statement of objective. So
Yep.
the goal is known, but then it's the product owner, the government product owner's responsibility. They're empowered to decide which part of the chair to buy or what shape of the part to buy, but they're then responsible for assembling the chair. Is that the right way to think about it?
Pretty much too. And there's some misconception too, especially in the early days, that agile buying of agile sprints or agile contracting and that method was buying 1 2 week sprint and then you're done. And that was the contract for that. And that's not what it means. It's setting up that repeated process to know that my outcome is going to be based on the fact that I need a place to sit. And so we're going to build a chair. Well, maybe we get halfway through and realize a chair isn't going to be what's necessary and that a bench would have been more appropriate. So while we still have the legs of the chair that we have bought and we've put into, into production, we're like, okay, we have these pieces. We haven't invested the full amount to the completion before we're able to make a pivot and change and say, okay, we're going to now, you needed a bench, a chair was what we thought you needed, now let's go to this. And so the contracts and the way that we set these up facilitate again that agility and the flexibility to change requirements, which a lot of times, freaks the contracting community out. Like, oh my gosh, you're changing requirements. You can't do that. Like, it has to be in there. But really, you're
Mhm.
going back to what is the objective? I need a place to sit. How are you facilitating that? I'm trying to build a chair. It didn't work. I'm building a bench now. But
Yeah.
again, the process is you're buying that repeated process. So you're buying, a year's worth of agile sprints to completely get you to an outcome. So you're looking at it from that way and that performance.
Yeah. So how did you know? I know how I knew that I thought it was working. Because I was seeing the code or I was seeing the releases. Back at
Mhm.
that time. I have no idea as a procurement officer what you would really see. We didn't interact that often in like the day to day of the office. What were your touch points with the project, and when did you realize like, this is successful? This new thing we tried worked.
So another really good pillar of success on this is making sure that your contracting officer representative, who has the requirement to administer the contract and kind of approve the invoices and do the check off that things had gotten done, a product owner, who's the person that's really in charge of the technical piece of things, and myself as the contracting officer, were in lockstep. So we met regularly with the project team, especially in those early days. We would do every 2 weeks. I was in there with them, and we were looking at the metrics of the process, the team. We're looking at the throughput, the velocity at which the team was able to complete user stories. We were looking at the challenges that came up and the roadblocks that got in the way, the dependencies, what had to happen for something else to happen. And then also we were looking at production bug rates. How fast can we move before we start diminishing the quality of the product? And so from that, you can tell a story that says, from the contractual perspective, that the performance of the organization is working well because of the fact that you can see the tangible results of optimizing your team. You get more story points out of an optimized team as they're working well together. And then, but a team can only go so much, so fast, and it can only be so big. Another big tenet of agile development is that you have to rely on small teams. So if your velocity is decreasing or your bug rates are increasing, the idea of throwing bodies at the contract to solve the problem isn't inherent in the agile process. It's more looking at, are you estimating correctly? Are you getting enough information or design up front? Do you understand what the users need in order to actually really get that in the hands of the engineer? So it's a much more communicative team on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, than under previous models and previous, like the waterfall method, really.
Got it. Okay, so let's fast forward in time. I wanna hear the whole sort of timeline of the story, and I also want to get to some like practical, tactical questions for you.
Yep.
So let's fast forward to 2013.
Mhm.
You have a new model, it's working, you're happy with the results, and then what happens in 2013?
Well, so we had already, like I said, we worked with the WhiteHouse.gov contract and shifted this, but then we also brought in Salesforce and did a Salesforce BPA. So we were able to recreate this a couple times within the organization. So it wasn't just do it once, did it work? Yay, that's fine. It was, again, let's do this iteratively ourselves, as they call it, dog fooding, eating our own dog food within the organization. So we had several models that were working. So one was Kanban, one was Scrum, one's based on story points, another's based on a different kind of metric maybe. But we really were nailing this down within our own organization and seeing really good results from it. I mean, it was fun to work on these contracts, which a lot of contracting professionals may not be able to say very often, but you see the output, you see the things happening in real time, you see people responding and getting what they need without a whole lot of going back and forth. And administratively, I knew what was going on, and I didn't have to be in there writing a whole bunch of contract modifications. I just had to be aware of how the process was working. Was the program office still keeping themselves on track with their objectives? And that's kind of where I sat between, was like, contractor was like, oh no, we might miss a milestone, and helping the government to facilitate those roadblocks that they might be running into. So when healthcare.gov happened, and they brought together and said, there's got to be better ways to do this. I already touched on, the fact that the US Digital Service was an idea kind of to be stood up. But prior to that, there were teams, interworking, intergovernment teams that were stood up to help combat the problem. One of those was created by the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, who brought in people who theoretically have a concept around what would happen with Agile software development. And then other teams were working on creating the digital services playbook, which got released around the same time. And I went to those meetings to the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and they're like, theoretically, what would happen if you did this? And I'm like, theoretically, we've been doing it here for 3 years. So I had actual examples to show and to demonstrate. And so they created a book, the TechFAR Handbook, which is not a way of resolving or bringing new policies in. It wasn't a way of changing the laws. It was saying we're relooking at the flexibilities that already exist within the federal acquisition regulations and encouraging you to use them. OFPP is great about that, of saying, like, we don't need to, the system isn't broke. We just need to apply a different model of looking at it. And this is something that we've come together. There were other people that, participated in this conversation. At the time, I didn't know it, but he was doing it on his own world, but Jonathan Mostowski was part of that effort, who eventually came into USDS as well in the procurement audit team, and other people in this space were kind of figuring it out. So while few people had done it, there was very much the lone wolves of acquisition out there being like, we got to try something new. So then I got brought into the U.S. Digital Service to try to expand and figure out and help them with, okay, we know acquisition's a problem. What do we need to do now? So that was really cool that got brought in. And in other situations, so 18F had been created at this time. And the procurement team over there was like Dave Zavinich and Chris Cairns. And then the PIF program was launched and out there. So people coming in from industry were having this like, okay, great, let's challenge procurement. But unless you have a really, really good understanding of the federal acquisition regulations, it's hard to say, I can just buy it like I do in the commercial world. Because ultimately, we have to protect taxpayers' dollars. And really understanding that as the key motivator is a little bit different than commercial world saying, this isn't working, I'm not getting profit off of it, I can scrap it and go to somebody else. In reality, we've got to be concerned about both the ecosystem of companies that we're working with, as well as making sure that we're getting good products out the door. So
Okay, so
right. USDS got created, procurement team got launched, and then we created things and built on that on the TechFAR hub, giving out case studies, giving examples, and just kind of building a community and an ecosystem around how do we do these kinds of things.
Okay, so just to recap, there were a couple words there I want to make sure everyone can follow. So healthcare.gov melts down. You are one of the first members to join United States Digital Service to bring in all this tech talent and bring in a new way of doing things to have greater success on technology projects. TechFAR is the Technology Federal Acquisition Regulations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the TechFAR hub is where first people are saying, how do we even do this? No one's done this before. And you say, I've been doing this for 3 years. And so your content from your procurements becomes the first drafts of the templates for how to do procurement of Agile product development services on the TechFAR hub, techfar.usds.gov, correct?
I think it's techfarhub.usds.gov, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And we'll post all these links below the video after this conversation's over for people who want to see this stuff. So now, that was 10 years ago. And so actually, sorry, before I jump ahead, so some people want to do Agile and have never seen it. You raise your hand and you say, I've been doing it for 3 years. All this new talent comes in from Silicon Valley. Are there other sort of competing methodologies that people are looking at in USDS? Was it like Agile and 5 other things, or was there a strong consensus that Agile is sort of the way to go? Like how did that unfold with USDS? How's the approach received?
It really kind of was on the Agile was just accepted as the norm for how software was being built in industry at the time. And the idea behind Agile is that there's not one Agile flavor either. There's multiple Agile flavors. So people were using different kinds that were, more adaptive to what they wanted to, how they wanted to work and how they wanted to produce. But it still came down to small teams developing iteratively with the idea that you're building a product with users, and then you're trying to get to an outcome that was based on an objective or a product definition or product vision. And so all of those fit very well with both what the product management trend was and is, as well as the methodology for which you're delivering it. There's always going to be people that come in and say, I can just, put a developer in a room and they can hammer it out and, do all of that. And that is true. But when you're thinking of a systemic way in order to bring on a company to take ownership of a problem, there has to be guardrails that go around it. So there were other methods that we're doing, and we're talking about my preference for firm fixed price, but there were other preferences for the traditional time and materials and labor hour way, which is looking more at the idea of, as experts, we're coming in and we know what we want, and we just need teams to help us build this. So we need people to come in that have these skill sets, and we want to just work together and build these things together. And there's no necessarily right or wrong way. It's just understanding how to apply the right approach at the right time with the right maturity of an organization in order to take it on. So US digital service experts, 18F experts, PIFs coming in and saying, I can run a digital service project and know how to run an agile team. Absolutely. A lot of other places in government, this was still a new concept. And even today, it's still a new concept for some organizations. And that's just adapting to the technology trends. But it isn't to say, we have to fix the problem with the same approach to everything. It's really looking at, where does risk lie? Who has the ultimate control of the outcome of the product? And of course, it is the government. But if you're putting in the hands of somebody to say, go build me a thing, then you've got to give them the autonomy to go ahead and build it. So giving them the process through which they can do that gives them a better chance of being successful for everyone. But if you're a blended team and a blended environment, and you're like, hey, I've just got to have people here that are of the same background, the same understanding of me of these, we've got to work together, then a different kind of contract is definitely, appropriate for you in those ways. And that time and material labor hour model works very well for that. So again, it kind of goes back to where you are in your journey to these contracts.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned having a preference for firm fixed price. This is something I really do want to learn more about. This is very timely for me and a procurement I'm working on right now. So I don't think I really have a preference. I just am a lot more familiar with time and materials, and want to get a lot smarter about firm fixed price. Obviously, I lived under it for 3 years, and I've seen a lot of the sort of way we did things. But can I just ask you some really practical, tactical questions right now
Of
about
course.
the procurement I'm working on? So twice in the last month, I've been in different meetings where different people said the following thing, almost verbatim, the same. They said buying sprints at a firm fixed price feels like it's basically the same as time and materials under another name. How do you respond to that?
The answer is that it isn't. So when you are thinking about the capacity of a team that you're buying, so time, it really goes down to an understanding of the agile practice. And that even when you go into agile, the reason that they have to look at estimation by story points as opposed to estimation by person hours is that they understand that people work at different times and different speeds, but that the concept of a team and what a team can accomplish is an output that is a tangible, measurable thing. So, a team working together with similar problem sets is going to have a repeated cadence, and that's that velocity. So, you're looking at a team based approach, not an individual one on one management of those individuals. So, when you're thinking about who's going to manage that team, then you're not thinking about it in the measure of like an hour. You're thinking about it in the measure of like, well, we've got two developers and they're able to handle this much work based on the complexity of the problem that they're given at any given day. So that's the methodology of agile when you look at it. So you're really understanding the capacity of the team to deliver based on the objectives and the timelines that you have, and the size of the team or the number of teams. So if you need a bigger project and you have more need for things, again, you don't just throw bodies at the same team. You think about, well, I have a 5-person team and I'm going to get a 7-person team over here to support this. Under the time and material model, it's a little more around the idea that you're getting best effort for something. They're working an hour. They're not actually delivering a finite product. So you really, as a government, have to make sure that you're on top of that to ensure that you're getting a delivered outcome at it. And if you don't know what a delivered outcome looks like, then you have to make sure, that you have good processes put in place for that. That's where the fixed price model actually protects the government more. Because in a fixed price model, if you do not get your delivery, there's a couple things that happen. One, you can bring it up and very much say, like, hey, I did not receive delivery of this. So therefore, we have to go back and start figuring out why. What was the process problem? So that's number one. So is it a person? Was it government? Was it something else? Why didn't we get delivery on that? So you can address performance behavior of a team or an individual at that level based on the output of a team. You look like you're about to jump. And the other thing I was going to say real
Yeah.
quick is that you can get compensation then, uh, additional compensation above and beyond because of the fact that it was a missed delivery. So in other than I missed the delivery, and this is in the federal acquisition regulations. I'm not sure about state and local, but basically it's like, okay, I missed giving you the chair leg. I didn't deliver it on time. And now I get not only the chair leg, but you're going to have to give me a custom design on it because you didn't deliver this on time. So going back to the premise of a contract is a promise to do something for a certain amount of money. You missed the promise. Therefore, you are going to make it whole and make the government whole. And so in that situation, you want something delivered tangibly that you can look at, evaluate, and say, yes, that's good. And under time and material and labor hours, that is not how those are set up to do. And so the government isn't necessarily protected in that model from that perspective.
I see. Okay. So with firm fixed price, if I'm understanding the way you just described it, we all agree what the must-haves are for a sprint, or we
Mhm.
all agree what the must-haves are for the next month if we're doing Kanban and a month is a cycle. And then the contractor is on the hook to deliver whatever we agreed on.
Mhm.
That's basically how firm fit, and that's the unit that we buy
Yep.
per sprint or per cycle.
Yep. We apply a definition of done to a sprint. We say that the outcome of the sprint must meet the definition of done. So again, your deliverable must meet the check marks. Going back to performance base, that's what this looks at. And then the outcome, the objective of that sprint is met at a smaller level. I have something tangible that met all those check marks. Therefore, I can accept it, and then you get paid.
Got it.
And
Okay.
if it doesn't happen, then you got to figure out why it didn't happen. But you can see it at that level, as opposed to building a whole bunch of stuff and then not knowing it was going to be something you didn't want until it's already, 2/3 built or however long down the line.
Yeah. Okay. It seems like the composition of a team probably has a lot to do with what procurement strategy you recommend. I'm curious if there's, a recipe, a certain kind of team that is very well suited, a certain kind of government team that is, most well suited to firm fixed price, or a certain kind of government team that is, more suited to time and materials. Do you have thoughts about that?
I kind of go back to what I talked a little bit about your organizational maturity and how aware you are of these practices. So again, when you're thinking about what are we trying to do here is get an outcome and alleviate the risks to the government. So as a contracting professional, that's a big thing for me. And of course, taxpayer dollars is monitoring and making sure that is. So we looked at these as capacity contracts. So we said, we have a budget of, this many thousands of dollars. We want to know how much we can get for this based on this, and then have a good understanding of how to be able to manage the team to that level. So when you're thinking about, again, the organizational maturity, is your organization, have you practiced digital service techniques before? Have you done agile software development? Do you understand the methodologies of user-centered design, human-centered design? And are you able to bring those in and really manage to that level? And if you are, then maybe that blended team environment might be a better choice for you. Um, the other way that you can do that is that if you are a novice and you've never done any of this, that's also where I say, the labor hour time materials is good as a baseline. So baseline 3 to 6 months with your agile team, and then convert it to fixed price. And in a lot of federal contracts, we have a whole determination and finding that if you must use labor hour and T&M, you have to justify it. And you even have to say, what are the things that I can do to turn this into fixed price? So, even in additionally that, you still have to justify a reason to the contract file that says, I have to use a different model than a fixed price model. And so being able to go in there and say, I'm going to baseline for 6 months, and at the result of this baseline, we'll know how, what's the right optimal skill sets on the team? How fast can they deliver something in 2 to 3 weeks? Those metrics can be established for baselining, and then you can convert it and have a better understanding of how to use it. But I think in most traditional contracts that I have done and programs where you have a product owner, a core, a program team who's relatively understanding of the Agile process, but may not be experts in it, it is a lower risk to the government to put the objectives and the outcomes in the hands of a company, let them take it, do it, work with the program team, product owner, program still make the decisions on priorities and what gets done. But then it really facilitates the knowledge of industry in this situation, where again, industry is farther ahead on the development techniques and practices than the government is in a lot of cases. So bringing that commercial world knowledge into government is something that you've got to take a look at. How do they establish their companies? How are they set up from their maturity as well? That's big in evaluation too. So you can look at companies' culture and who do they have as their CEO and their director of design and product management lead, and all of these are things that you would want to see in a company that knows how to do this too. So really understanding the maturity of an organization, both from the vendor side as well as the organizational side, is how you come to those determinations and strategies that output a good acquisition strategy that gets you the potential for the best result. Because that's always what you're trying to do, is get that best result. But no contract is perfect. So you're just trying to set yourself up for the best opportunity for success for both sides. And of course, the end users.
Got it. There's so much more I would love to ask you, but you've answered my critical questions, and I want to make sure that some of the people who've tuned in today can ask questions. So let's see if there are some questions that we can pull up on the screen here and give other people a chance to chime in. Does anyone have questions they would like to ask while we have Tracy here to chat about this? And we'll wait to see if there are questions to come in. I'd be happy to ask another question about baselining. Okay, so let's see if we can get a question promoted on the screen. Here comes one. It's challenging to see the structure of this if not done previously. How do you bridge the gap for the first time?
There's a couple different models, like we've said, that are examples on the TechFAR hub, as well as you can go in there and learn how the pricing is done. There is an IGCE and an Agile team IGCE builder out there, and some explanation of how to see this actually put into a contract, or how there's a template that's mocked up from a real world IGCE, not the real dollar amounts, of course, but very similar to what could have been on an actual contract. And so, we've put those resources out there to take a look at it. But if you can't get to those resources, or still want to understand a better way of doing this, another way to research it is, again, going and looking at what industry is doing. A lot of these contract models were also kind of being done a little bit in industry from the commercial side. There was other research that was showing that it was a couple other governments were picking this models up. But it's, again, thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish, and to kind of put it together in a way that understands the Agile development. I'd say the axioms, the things that have to be true to make Agile development work, and then understanding where that meets the road with what actually has to be in a contract. And then, I know there's policies and practices and things that get in the way of this within our organizations. But it really is going and being that champion of that and saying, hey, the likelihood of the outcome has been proven on this. We have proven this again and again and again. We in the Digital Services Coalition is a good example of that. We have, many different companies that are all doing this, and the preponderance of the contracts that we have done in the digital service community is the firm fixed price model. So another way to also look at it is to, approach industry and say, how have you done this, or where have you seen this work, and hearing from them and having good conversations. All of that is allowed as per market research. You're not, you're just gaining information around what are pricing models out there in the world that you can use. So use industry to also tell you how to kind of approach this as well too.
Great. And we'll post a link to the IGCE, the calculator
Mhm.
worksheet. It's a super helpful resource, and we'll put it up on the description below this video as well when we're done. All right, the next question is, how close have your IGCEs, so these are the calculator estimates, how close have your IGCEs been in terms of the actual contractor effort required? Do you feel you have been overpaying or underpayment as you build historical data?
That's a great question. So the kind of the traditional way of doing a competition and you're trying to get a lower price for a certain value doesn't really serve the process, because again, when we go back to thinking around how technology is built, you're always going to want something new, you're always going to need to update something. So anytime that you are working on a new product, technology product, you have to think about how much am I willing to invest in this product in order to make it successful. So your investment now becomes your capacity, or where we look at to say, what was our budget range? So IGCE and budget is different in the situation, but we would often release the budget numbers to say, we're planning to budget this amount of money into this thing. So tell me, how much of your team and your knowledge and your effort can I get for this budgeted amount? So help me understand your full capacity. And then we look at what actually has to be done in the system. And those are the tough decisions that product owners have to make around functionality versus getting something out the door that is like, okay, minimum viable product, very important. But a lot of times you have your must haves, your nice to haves, your could haves. And sometimes, you can apply your could haves and nice to haves in there. But what really goes back to the return on that investment again is how you can optimize your team to making sure that you're getting the best output from them. So that is going back and making sure that you're having regular retrospectives with your team to say, was our estimation on this that we thought we were going to do correct? If not, why? Um, and what else could improve our outcomes on this? But the team size isn't necessarily going to change unless you have a requirement for it. And of course, you can always we talk about this as the elastic triangle versus an iron triangle. So kind of under the waterfall method, you fixed 3 points, which was your scope, you fixed your time, and you fixed your dollars. So those three things were written in, and they said, okay, I'm going to get this thing for this amount of money, and it's going to be delivered in this time. Under agile development processes, there must be one of those elements that must be elastic in order for it to work. So if you have something that has to go out the door immediately, you might have to have more money to add more teams to get something done. If your scope is flexible, then you have the ability to say, all right, so I need this outcome to happen, but I need the scrappiest thing I can get out the door first, and then we'll come back and start investing more money and resources as we get them into improving the experience on it. Or time. Can we delay this to make sure that it's built correctly? Because we have a limited scope and a limited, budget. So what are we going to have to do on time? And as long as you kind of understand where your flexible points are, you can come back and figure out like that return on investment is, yes, I'm understanding what is the capacity I can get from the team that I have in the scenario that I'm in.
Tracy, can I paraphrase and say that back to you just to make sure I got your answer to that question
Sure.
correctly?
Yep.
So it sounds like it all really hinges on the product owner. If you need to have a really good, really not good, you need to have a really engaged product owner to ensure that you're getting the right return on your investment. And it sounds like if you don't really know. Is that a fair summary of what you just said?
I don't think it's that you don't know that you're going to get the return on the investment, but you keep pointing to your objective as your North Star. Whether the process is working really well is one thing, but if you're not getting your objective and you're not getting ready to meet that, then you have to go back and say, well, what decisions am I making as a program team that are making me stray from this? One of the big things in the digital services playbook was that the decision making power has to be at that lower level. So it really is, I would say, yes, that product owner or that small team really has to be empowered to be able to make those technical decisions on, in a 2-week sprint or ready for the next one, and to understand what's the outcome of a decision that they make that may impact the overall like delivery and outcome. So it does take away the responsibility of the contractor for absolutely delivering 100% on the outcome, because it does put the product owner as the decision maker that says, you are building to what we're supposed to be doing, but if I stray from this and you are still building what I'm saying, and you're still, taking the work and you're still delivering the work, we might have gone down a different path together. And that's where we've got to pull it back and say, let's stop, finger pointing. It's how do we right size it? How do we get back to what we tried to do? It may not be a failure of the contract. It's just a misunderstanding of how priorities came in, or, things come into government all the time, new policies, new regulations. How do you pivot? How do you shift? And as a program office gets better in their maturity, they understand those consequences and those decision making points, and can make them with a lot more ease and foresight about what those consequences might be. The other thing is always then saying, like, well, how do I put skin in the game with the company from that perspective? And so we did use incentive fees on the contract we had done before, where under Kanban, it was like, okay, if you, I think we had incentivized like delivery of work product within 22 days or something, or we had it as an acceptable quality level of 22 days was a regular cycle with the team working well. And then we incentivized an award fee for if you got something done in 19 days, because it meant that more work got up on the board. So we got more capacity out of the team, but we still had to align that with the bug rates. So you can't increase bug rates just to get the award fee. So that was some of those things. So where did incentives come into play? And incentives might look different for your companies than they do from a traditional standpoint in that sense.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so I see one more question coming up, and after this, we're not going to get to all of the questions, obviously, by the time this session ends. So I do want to just preview for people who haven't gotten their questions answered yet. Tracy has agreed to do another one of these sessions where, rather than it being me asking for storytelling and questions that sort of serve my needs, the focus can really be deep dives into people's real world questions. I'm hoping it can be sort of lightning rounds of deep dives into like real world procurement puzzles. So we'll do this question, and then I hope people will stay on for just one more minute to give some feedback. I'll put a link up that people can go to. But let's do this one more. So this one says, what supportive roles outside PMs, engineers, etc., do you need to best manage a time and materials development contract? How do you ensure you're getting sufficient value to justify the rates?
In terms of that, I mean, there are best practices for product development that are out there, requiring people along the lines of change management and teams. You need service design professionals. Customer experience is a new thing in the government. What does that look? How is that different from user research and user experience? Understanding those different skill sets is all part of the big team and how you pull that all together. So if you're pure development team, maybe comprised of a designer, 3 or 4 developers, like maybe a senior developer and junior developers. You've got a documentation expert or a content person in there that's coming through and doing the writing and stuff, a scrum master. So you're looking at those teams of like, what's a good size unit of people that have the skills that I would need to regularly kind of enable the agile software development process. Again, traditionally, those range between, I would say, around teams as small as 4 to maybe as large as 12. But if you start getting over that, your team size starts becoming more of the problem. And you'd have to start mitigating to that. So my challenge was specifically that around the time and materials and labor hours thing. It is difficult to understand how you ensure that you're still continually getting the value out of that. But the government has to take a very I would say more hands-on role in playing that either potentially Scrum Master, product owner, like on hand kind of thing. The other skill sets that can facilitate in there, definitely the design developers. We see that happen at Kessel Run. We've seen that happen at the VA. So there are places where these teams do come together and work for it. But I also see where we've transitioned a little bit away from that from the VA. And now if you look at Cedar that was done through VA, and then now the new recompetition of that Spruce, these are large multiple award contracts that are being done to support the digital service efforts of like va.gov. And they really go back to that fixed price modular contracting iterative basis to say, we know we're going to get output. And we can take our skill sets, which is the knowledge that we have as developers and designers and things like that. And instead of having to apply ourselves to the hands-on keyboard, actual manufacturing of it, we can then apply to looking at the bigger picture. How do we make the decision about what we go next? How do we make those backlog decisions? How do we get in front of users? And maybe those are where you can use that government knowledge to more appropriately understand the bigger product design picture and really kind of understand product thinking. So that would kind of be a way to do that and to make sure that you're getting value out of the time and materials contracts or labor hour contracts, but you still kind of have to be more administratively in it. All of these do say you have to be more administratively on a day-to-day basis than the traditional methods, but the traditional methods continue to not produce results when we have seen in time and time again on GAO reports and other things that you've got large contracts that didn't provide the system that was supposed to be, and you have to extend it out another $1 billion for another 3 or 4 years, and that's what we're trying to mitigate and avoid. So you've got something tangible in your hand now. If you want to launch it live, go for it. And that's just kind of what you have to work through.
Great. Tracy, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope other people who tuned in have too. I put a link up on the screen. You can snap the QR code or you can go to this bit.ly link. Please, please, please. This is our first live stream. Would absolutely love to get feedback about what you found useful. Any suggestions for making these more useful in the future. And as I said, Tracy has generously offered to do another one of these. And so you can sign up at this link as well. Let us know if you're interested in participating. And I'll follow up. And so if people have procurements that you're working on and you want to take a turn in the hot seat and get Tracy's reactions or guidance.
As you can tell, I nerd out about this as much as anybody nerds out about anything. So I'm definitely a procurement geek and would love to have these conversations with anybody, whether through this or offline or whatever. I'm very available. And thank you so much, Brian, for teeing this up and allowing me to be your first guest. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I just wanted to take one more minute while I have you here and give you kudos for having the courage to do something that had not been done before. When Lee came to you with this challenge, I see a different way to do it, and I don't think that you can figure out how to do it. You have widened the path for me and for so many people who came, after that project to work in a really different way, and I think make a lot of our jobs a lot more fulfilling and make a really big difference for the people who use the digital infrastructure we're building with these tools. So thank you so much.
Thank you.